of course, no woman had ever done it. And on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, she took off from Oakland, California, and flew to Hawaii with two navigators, a man named Harry Manning and Fred Noonan, recently departed from, what's it got here? That looks like it might work. Hold the phone, folks. We'll see. Uh-oh. Yeah. Different connector on the iPad. I think this side's fine, but what you got?
No, maybe not.
Yeah, you see these MacBooks have, it's not the same as for an iPhone. It's a different animal.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah, and it's not much different, but it is different.
Okay.
All right.
We tried.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I've never done this upside down. It's cool. Whoa, no, stop. Whoa. Don't do that. Go back. I'm not even sure I'm going the right direction. Let me get it straightened out. Okay. So she flies to Hawaii with two navigators, Manning and Noonan. But in trying to take off from Hawaii to fly to Howland Island, her first stop, she loses control of the airplane. And it's called a ground loop, but she wrecks the airplane on takeoff. And it has to be sent back to California to be repaired. Yeah, as the April and May of 37, it's being repaired at the Lockheed shop. So she's going to try again. And on May 20th, she takes off to start her second attempt to fly around the world. But this time, Manning, one of the navigators, is not with her. It's just her and Fred Noonan. And she's going to, come on. Yeah. Fred Noonan, Amelia Earhart. Fred Noonan, very fine celestial aerial navigator. Come on. No, it doesn't want to do it. Oops, no, it does too much.
The struggle is real.
Boy, it's a pain in the butt. There we go. They're going the other direction around the world. They're successful and ultimately get to Lae, New Guinea on the 29th of June. Yeah. June 29th. Amelia's looking a little worse for wear, but she's been flying for a month, you know, kind of beat. But by a couple of days later, she's looking pretty good. The guy beside her is a guy named Frank Howard. He was the manager of the oil company. He's there in New Guinea. He's just completed the fueling of her airplane for the big flight to Howland Island the next day. July 2nd, 1937, she takes off, kind of a hairy takeoff. Airplane's loaded heavier than it's ever been, but she gets it into the air for the 2,500-mile flight to Howland Island. It's going to take her about 19 hours. And her goal is Howland Island, just a fly speck of land in the middle of the Pacific. Waiting for her there is the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca and its captain, Warner Thompson. Come on, don't do that. I didn't touch it. Come on. Boy. And then it skips ahead about 3. Okay. And beginning at about 2:45 in the morning, Itasca time, Itasca starts to hear her. She's very weak, and but about every hour, they hear her a little more strongly. She's getting closer, but she doesn't reply to their questions. They hear her calls, and they ask her questions. She doesn't reply, and they assume that she's just ignoring them. And then at 7:42, they hear her say, "We must be on you, but cannot see you, but gas is running low. Have been unable to contact you by radio. We're flying at 1,000 feet." And this was heard at strength 5, maximum strength. So they seem to be very close, but they haven't been able to hear any of the radio calls. That's the first Itasca knows that she hasn't heard anything they've been saying. And why is she down at 1,000 feet if she's looking for an island out there someplace? She's down low. Why is she down low? Well, here's why. This is what it looks like out there. And if we had a big screen, you could see it. The cloud shadows look like islands. You can't tell anything. Howland is in that picture, but you'd hardly know it. Okay, so there's somewhere out here close enough to Howland for them to hear her. And the only other islands anywhere nearby, and they're not even nearby, are in the Phoenix group, McKeon and Gardner. They're about 300 and 350 miles away. And then at 8:43 in the morning, she says, "We are on the line 157337. Oh, what does that mean? And then just a couple minutes later, she says, "We're running on the line north and south." And that's all they hear. They hear nothing more. They desperately try to call her. They say, "We hear you. Can you hear us?" Nothing. That's the last the Coast Guard hears from her while she was in flight. There's a massive sea and air search by the Coast Guard and Navy, but they find no trace of the airplane. They finally conclude that at about 9 o'clock local time, the plane landed on the sea to the northwest of Howland Island, within 120 miles of the island. That's the official Navy verdict, although that's pure speculation. They found no floating wreckage, no oil slick, no raft, nothing. But that's what they assumed must have happened. Well, there are 2 theories that cropped up. One, as the U.S. Navy said, she simply ran out of gas, crashed at sea, and sank. Or it didn't take long before a conspiracy theory to crop up saying that she was captured by the Japanese. Our organization was founded in 1985, and people were always coming to me and saying, well, when are you going after Amelia? And my reply was always, there's no evidence that she was captured by the Japanese, and an ocean search is impracticable. There's just nothing you can do with such a small target in that much ocean. And there's no substantive lead to investigate. The whole thing is just a media circus, and I don't want any part of it. And then in 1988, two guys came to us, Tom Gannon and Tom Willey, and they were experienced aerial navigators. They had used the same techniques that Fred Noonan used to navigate during World War II. They had been navigators during the war. And they said that what she was last heard to say about flying on the line 157, 337, and 337 and running north makes perfect sense to an aerial navigator. And if she did what she said she was doing, she should have gotten to another island. And nobody's ever searched for her there. So we did some checking, and the more we looked into it, the more sense it made. So now it's been 33 years, hundreds of volunteer researchers, forensic analysis by dozens of experts. We've raised and spent something over $7 million. We've done archival research everywhere, from Europe, the Pacific, New Zealand, Australia. And we've done these 12 expeditions to the South Pacific. We think she landed at Gardner Island, now known as Nicomaroro. And we have quantitative evidence to prove the case. We have the in-flight radio signals. We have the post-loss radio signals. We're going to talk about all these. We have signs of recent habitation on the island. And we have photographic evidence. We have evidence of a castaway that was found on the island. And we have archaeological evidence. Well, let's talk about the in-flight radio signals. First thing you need to understand is that Earhart could transmit on two frequencies. And we won't get down in the weeds about radio frequencies, but she could transmit on 3105 kilocycles. Today they're called kilohertz, and 6210 kilohertz. She relied solely on voice communications. Neither she nor Noonan knew Morse code. If you can believe that, in 1937, when most aviation communication was done in code, neither one of them knew code. By law, by international agreement, these transmissions on these frequencies, her frequencies, could only be made by a US registered aircraft calling a ground station. And in 1937, in July of 37, the only US registered aircraft anywhere in the South Central Pacific was Earhart's. So if you hear a signal on one of these frequencies, whether you can make out what's being said or not, it means her transmitter is being keyed. Unless somebody is doing something illegal and perpetrating a hoax, which you have to consider as a possibility. Okay, that, go away. Oh, well. That 157337 line is a line of position that Noonan can establish by taking a sighting on the rising sun. He knows when he gets to this line. I'm going to have to do something about that. No, longitude is, it's not longitude. There we go. Here's how it works. The sun comes up sort of in the east. It varies. But on this particular day, it came up at 67 degrees true. And daylight comes across the surface of the earth at a known rate. The line of dawn, it's called the terminator between night and day, comes across the surface at a known rate. And it's a line that's 90 degrees to where the sun's rising. If you've got an almanac that gives you the information, the timing, and a chronometer that's accurate down to the second, you can note the time that you see the first hint, the first bit of the rising sun. And you can draw a line on your map and say, I've got to be right here, because that's where the terminator is at this moment in time. And they were able to get that line. And it's going to be 157337 on that morning, because the sun rises at 67 degrees. That's not going to change. It's going to be a 157337 line, 337 this way, 157 that way. And they can get that line right after the sun comes up. So they know they're somewhere on this line. They don't know whether they're up north or down south, but they know they're on that line. And Noonan also knows how fast he's going. And he knows he can draw this line. And he says, well, from this line to this line, if it passes through my destination, Howland Island, is, call it 150 miles. And I'm going 150 miles an hour. Therefore, in 1 hour, I will be on a line that passes through Howland Island. Now, if I'm dead on, Howland will be right in front of me. But if it's not, I know it's either down that way or that way. It's like getting up on an interstate and up the on-ramp, but somebody's moved all the signs and you don't know whether the place you want to go to is this way or this way. That was the situation they were in. That's why she said, we are on the line 157337, running online north and south. We're searching back and forth on this line. That's why it makes so much sense. Okay, oops. Now, here's what fooled a lot of people. That airplane had a transmitting antenna on the top of the fuselage. It's on a mast here and it goes back to each tail. And we did a computer modeling of the whole antenna system of the airplane and discovered that our laptop doesn't work. Come on. There we go. Boom, boom, boom. Come on. We're almost there. There. Okay. What we discovered is that the propagation pattern of the antenna system had a flaw in it. It had a dimple in the middle of it, just like where the stem of an apple is. And what that meant was if Howland Island is down here, and no, Howland Island's up here, and you're south of it, you can't hear this airplane if you're within about 80 miles of Howland Island. They were hearing her really loud and they thought it meant she was close by, but it didn't mean that. It meant she was more like 150 to 200 miles away. That's when they stand the best chance of hearing the airplane as loudly as they did. So she's not right on top of them as everybody assumes she was. She appears to have been down south of Howland Island. She didn't know she was south, but she's gone north for a while. Then she turns around and goes south and keeps going. Ooh, come on, stop. Man. Okay. So when she said at 7:42, we must be on you, but cannot see you, because of this, if she's transmitting, and you're hearing her, you have to be within this donut. And Howland's within the donut. She's down here. So when she thinks she's on top of them, she's actually at least 150 miles away. And she tries to take a bearing with her loop antenna, and that doesn't work either. And then an hour later, that's when she says we are on the line running north and south. She's running south. Howland is almost out of the donut now. So the next time she tries to call them, they're not going to hear her. And that's why they didn't hear her anymore, because she was too far south, outside the donut. Okay, now this is the smoking gun everybody talks about. So she has to be out of fuel. If she's still in the air, she has to be out of fuel by noon. Now they're hearing her at about 9 o'clock in the morning. And everybody agrees that by noon, she's out of fuel if she's still flying, burning fuel at that rate. But it's at 6:25 p.m., Itasca on her frequency hears her. They can't make out what she says, very weak and unintelligible, but it's on her frequency. And 5 minutes later, two ships, HMS Achilles, a British cruiser, and a freighter, the New Zealand Star, also hear signals on her frequency. They're hearing Earhart trying to talk to Itasca, and it's not working. But she's out there transmitting, and at a time when she's got to be out of fuel if she's continued flying. Well, the news goes out, and the press goes crazy. You know, the signals are from Earhart. The radio assures flyers alive. Thank God they're safe, Putnam, her husband, says. Everybody, oh, this is going to have a happy ending. She's out there alive someplace. And they're all assuming that the airplane has landed in the water and is calling for help because it'll float just fine with these big empty fuel tanks. And so Itasca goes searching for her. But they also say, well, we've got to get some airplanes out there looking for her. So the Navy scrambles a battleship from Pearl Harbor, USS Colorado, and they've got 3 airplanes aboard, catapult launched float planes, and they're going to go on down and help search for this airplane that's floating around in the water. A couple thousand miles, but they're going. Okay, so this is Orrin Murfin, Rear Admiral Orrin Murfin, who's in charge of the search, and he's managing the search with a big map. He's compiling all the locations of ships and all the clues they have to where they should be looking. That map still exists someplace on my laptop. Oop, there we go. Come on, back up. They really need to see this, guys. Man, I don't know why this does this. Oop, whoop, woo. We're getting close. All right, I'm going to leave it right here. I'm not going to screw with it. Okay, the map really exists, and it's in the San Bruno National Archives. And this is the map, and you can't see it anywhere from where you're sitting. But a lot of people are hearing these radio calls on Earhart's frequency. And they know they're here in Earhart. And Pan American Airways has radio direction finder stations in Hawaii, in Midway and Wake Islands across the Northern Pacific. And they use these direction finder stations to guide the Pan Am Clippers across the Atlantic. They're flying passengers across the Pacific. But they hear these signals too. And they're taking bearings on these signals because we've got them in bearings from 3 different locations. Maybe they'll give us a hint of where the signals are coming from. And the signals are coming down here. But the problem the Navy ran into with this map, the map they had showed Howland and Baker in the area she's expected to be at just fine. But it ended 2.5 degrees south of the equator. And these lines went off the map. It looked like they were going to cross off the map. Well, what do? We cut the top off the map, flip it over, paste it along the bottom of the map, hand draw the latitude, longitude lines, and then plot in the location of known islands and stuff there. And when you do that, bingo, these lines, bearings are crossing right near Gardner Island. Well, she's down there. Maybe she's floating around in the water near Gardner Island. Except Lockheed chimes in and says, guys, if you're hearing radio signals from this airplane night after night after night, which they were, that airplane's not in the water because the radios will be wet because of where they're located. Radios don't like to be wet. And that airplane's on land. Not only that, if they've gone on for as long as they have, like 3 or 4 nights now, she's got to be able to recharge the battery that the radio depends upon. And the only way she can do that is to run an engine. And she can't run an engine unless the airplane's on its wheels. So she's landed somewhere. She's on land. And there's just not a lot of land down there. And where do your bearings cross? Gardner Island. Well, we better go look at Gardner Island. And that's what Colorado's going to do. Well, that's what Gardner Island looks like. It's about almost 4 miles long and about 1 mile across. It's a classic atoll with a big lagoon in the middle and land, a ribbon of land around it, and a fringing reef. It doesn't want to go away. We're not going to talk about harmonics. We got to talk about Warwick Gardner. All right. And this is the west end of Gardner Island. I wish you could see it better. Big fringing reef, and there's a shipwreck there. It was a British freighter that had gone aground on the reef in 1929. Okay. Uninhabited coral atoll. There were also reported receptions of distress calls on harmonics, on harmonic frequencies. Now, a harmonic is a multiple of a primary frequency. Again, her primary frequencies are 3105 and 6210. Her primary of 3105, the first harmonic, or the second harmonic, is 6210, and then the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, higher. Harmonics travel much, much further. And if you're in the right place, you get a very clear signal. Whereas you're not hearing much of anything on the primary, just some unintelligible stuff. If you're in the right place to receive a harmonic, you might hear crystal clear, but it'll fade in and out. It happens all the time now. You'll stumble across transmissions on shortwave from the other side of the world. You go, how the hell did that happen? Well, okay, so people in the US start hearing Earhart on a harmonic. Now, Mabel Larimore in she's in Amarillo, Texas. She's not listening for signals from Amelia Earhart. She's cruising the dial of her shortwave, like many people did, just for entertainment late at night. And she stumbles upon, to her amazement, Amelia Earhart calling for help. And she hears Amelia say, and this is at 9 p.m. that night, Earhart disappears. Plane down on small, uninhabited, uncharted island, part on land, part in water. Navigator Fred Noonan seriously injured, needs help immediately. She has some injury, but not as serious. Whoa. And ultimately, 9 people around the country and in Canada hear very similar transmissions. The most interesting one is down in St. Petersburg, Florida. A 15-year-old girl named Betty Klink, who keeps a notebook beside her radio. And when she hears Amelia Earhart calling for help, very unexpectedly, she grabs her notebook and starts jotting down what she can understand, phrases. And the notebook goes on for 5 pages, and she makes time notations. It's an hour and 3/4. And her father comes home from work and, Dad, I'm hearing Amelia Earhart. He looks at it. And when it's over, he says, the Coast Guard's got to know about this. And he runs down to the Coast Guard station in St. Pete. And they say, look, a lot of people are hearing this. We're on top of it. Don't worry about it. And he can't get them to pay attention to it. Comes back. Betty's very frustrated. But one of the things in her notebook, there's several things in here that are what we consider to be occult information. Information that Betty couldn't have known. Several places in her notebook, she writes NYNY, NYNY, or something that sounds like New York. And I asked Betty, because we first found her in 2000. She had long since given up, but she still had her notebook. And I said, what's NYNY? She said, that's New York, New York. It's the way I write New York City. I thought she was saying New York City. That freighter on the ground at Gardner Island is the SS Norwich City. That's what we think happened, that she landed on that reef. Now, that reef, don't go backing up on me. You could ride a bicycle on that reef. I've been there many times now. Out near where the waves break, it's very smooth, flat. Closer to shore, it gets very jagged, pitted, rugged, so you can't taxi up onto the beach to be safe. You're stuck out there. And the trouble is, the tide comes in. When she arrived on that morning, the tide was low. We hindcasted the tides, and the tide was low. The reef would be bare, as it was here when we were out there. This was 2010. But the tide does come in. And to run the engine, the prop's got to clear the water. You can't run that prop if it's hitting the water. You just can't do it. And if it gets high enough, it'll hit the transmitter, and then the game's over. So we reasoned that if we take the credible reported post-loss signals, they should occur at times when she could run the engine, because she also uses her battery to start the engine. You'd be crazy to transmit on battery alone and run down your battery and not be able to start your engine. So you're going to start the engine first, and then you're going to transmit. So do the credible signals match times when the tide would be low enough? In order to learn that, figure that out, you've got to survey the reef, which we did in 2007, which was a lot of fun, I can tell you that. But this is what we found. You're not going to see much detail, but the big blue waves, that's the tide coming in and out. Dark is daylight, light is day. The green lines are credible signals. They only occur, this is the first night, they only occur when the water level is low enough to run the prop. On the second night, same story. Third night, it goes on and on, and every night it's. But the last one was on July 7th, and the Navy flew over on the 9th. So by then the airplane had been washed into the ocean. So there were 137 reported signals, 57 are credible, 25 are what we consider credible beyond a reasonable doubt. There's just no way these signals can take place if they're not sent from that airplane on that island. Excuse me for a second. Questions? Yeah. Unfortunately, well, no, the others wrote down what they heard, but subsequently lost their notes. Betty was the only one that still had her notes. But the others described, and none of them knew, but these people didn't know each other. And they all talk about the same story. The navigator is injured, has to have help immediately. Airplane's part land, part water, uninhabited island, all that. Oh, signs of recent habitation. So the Navy gets down there, Colorado gets down there and refuels Itasca, and they have these 3 float planes, O3U3 Corsairs. And on July 9th, 1 week after the disappearance, they fly over Gardner Island looking for an airplane. But when they're, and we have one picture that was taken from one of those airplanes. We don't know which airplane took it, but it's noted on the back, U.S. Navy, July 9th, 27, Gardner Island. And we can see in the photograph that the tide is high. And that checks with our hindcasting. Yeah, the tide was high. So when they fly over the island, they don't recognize the reef as a place to land. It doesn't look like a runway to them. It's just a reef with waves running across it. And they look at the beach and they look at the island. They don't see an airplane. And they say, well, Lockheed says the airplane, if these signals were genuine, the airplane's got to be on land and the signals cross at Gardner Island, but there's no airplane at Gardner Island. No, because it's in the water now. And so they wrote it off. Well, all of those signals must have somehow been bogus or misunderstandings. And the rest of the Navy search. Oh, and they also said signs of recent habitation were clearly evident on the island. But they were under the impression that all these islands had native work parties harvesting coconuts. So they didn't think anything of that. Gardner had had no work parties since 1892. So the signals were disregarded, and the aircraft carrier Lexington showed up with 63 airplanes, and the rest of the Navy search takes place on open ocean, looking for floating wreckage, find nothing. And after all that, Gardner Island, way down there, got 20 minutes of aerial inspection, and they wrote it off. Photographic evidence. 3 years later, the British get around to checking out Gardner Island for future colonization. And they send an expedition. And the expedition, the colonial officers take a bunch of pictures. And one of the pictures they take shows the western end of the island and the shipwreck. But there's something sticking up out of the water on the reef that shouldn't be there on an uninhabited island. There shouldn't be there. And our forensic imaging specialist, Jeff Glickman, we went to Oxford, England to get the original copy of this thing and took a very high resolution copy photo. And Jeff worked on it, reported back, this appears to be the wreckage of a Lockheed Electra landing gear. I said, whoa, you're telling me we've got a picture of wrecked Electra landing gear on the reef at Gardner Island 3 months after she disappears? He says, well, that's what I said. I said, I got to have a second opinion on this. We did some more checking, and turns out when Earhart wrecked the airplane in Hawaii, the right main landing gear came off, was torn off, and it came apart in the same way suggested by this photograph. So that's how a Lockheed Electra landing gear fails if the thing is scrubbed along on its belly. well, I need somebody to look at this. And so we had good connections at the State Department. I could explain how that happened, but it'd be here the rest of the night. We had good connections at the State Department. They said, let us know if we can help you. And I said, I need somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight to look at this photograph and tell me what they see. And he said, we can do that. And a few months later, they called me in, and I talked to 3 guys who didn't have last names. And and they said, basically, we see what your guy sees. And we did our own research. So I can't tell you that it's Lockheed Electro landing gear, but that's what it looks like. And I said, well, you're going to give me a report, right? I said, no, we're not going to give you a report. But I can tell people. No, you can't tell people what. I said, what's the deal? He said, look, if the people we really work for knew we were spending time on this, we'd get in all kinds of trouble. So, we did this as a favor to the Assistant Secretary of State that you know. So, okay. So I thought I was kind of screwed on that one. But then the Assistant Secretary of State couldn't keep his mouth shut. And the next thing I knew, I was on a stage at the State Department with the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of Transportation, Ray LaHood. They called in Bob Ballard to endorse us, and other dignitaries. And I was up there and was just, whoa. And they helped us raise money for our next expedition. I mean, it was crazy. At Department of State. Come on. Oop. About every time I think. All right, so let's talk about Nikomororo, Gardner Island. It's now part of the Republic of Kiribati, and it's called Nikomororo now. Gilbert East name. First work party got there in December of 1938. And they built a very nice village over here and village. But in 1963, well, in about 1960, it just stopped raining for some reason. And there's no fresh water on the island. And the drought got too bad. And they simply abandoned it in 1963 and took everybody off and sent them to the Solomon Islands. But in 1940, so Amelia disappears in 37. In 1940, the first resident British colonial officer comes to take up residence on the island. His name is Gerald Gallagher. And he writes a telegram, sends a telegram to his superior in Tarawa, who says, please obtain from Kawata, I need my glasses to read this. This is September 23rd, 1940. Please obtain from Kawata, native magistrate Gardner, on way to Central Hospital in Tarawa, a certain bottle alleged to have been found near Skull, discovered on Gardner Island. Grateful you return bottle in safe, you retain bottle in safe place for present, and ask Kawata not to talk about Skull, which is just possibly that of Amelia Earhart. Whoa. Well, this is what Gallagher found. The red bones are the bones that he found. He found a partial skeleton. Many of the bones have been carried off by the giant coconut crabs who live on the island. They're awesome. A Benedictine bottle, as it turned out. Part of a woman's shoe, and part of a man's shoe, and a sextant box that had numbers on it, a navigational instrument, but just the box, and it had numbers on it. And part of a sextant, an inverting eyepiece, some corks with brass chains, we don't know. The remains of a fire, dead birds, dead turtle. This was a castaway. This was somebody who had tried to survive and didn't make it. And woman's shoe, sextant box, that's what made him think, God, this might be Amelia Earhart. So he reports this to the superiors in Fiji, 1,000 miles away. And Sir Harry Luke, the High Commissioner, says, you keep the matter strictly secret and send everything to Fiji. So he does that. And Fiji is way down here and Gardner is up here and so forth. So Sir Harry's staff has recommendations about this. One of them says you need to contact the Americans to get the dental records because there's some teeth in the skull. You're got to do that. And another one says that you need to ask the U.S. consul down in Sydney. There's no consul in Fiji. You got to go to Australia, but you got to ask them about the numbers on this section box. Maybe they can. And another one said, well, you could send the bones to the anthropology department at the University of Sydney in Australia. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I missed it earlier. Someone wants to know, does transmission gap in 1937 correspond to sunspot cycle?
There was a lot of sunspot activity in 1937, in July of 37. Yeah, that's one of the factors that we used plugged into our analysis of the propagation. We did a 12-year study of those signals using software and algorithms that were developed actually by the NSA to evaluate. It's called IcePack. It's a big long acronym, but yeah. Okay, so we had all these staff recommendations about what he should do, and he denied all of them. He said, no, we're going to keep this investigation of this skeleton right here in Fiji. Well, why would he say that? It's September of 1940. What else is going on in September of 1940? Battle of Britain. There's a lot of political tension between the United States and Great Britain. Churchill wants Roosevelt to do more. Roosevelt's got an election coming up in November, and he's worried about it. The U.S. is very isolationist. And Sir Harry Luke knows all this. And he says, you think I'm going to put myself in the middle of that? We have U.S. journalists crawling all over me? And it said, no, we're going to keep this right here in Fiji. And so he gave the bones to a local doctor who ran the medical school in Fiji, but it's a medical school that trained not doctors, but native medical practitioners like EMTs. He had no training in this particular line of investigation, but he measured the bones and he applied the formulas that were available to him. And he drew the conclusion that it may be definitely stated that the skeleton is that of a male and that it could be that of a short, stocky, muscular European or even half caste or person of mixed European descent. And we tracked down his report and his notes. So we had those. Well, we'll get to that. The report, so the secretary of the High Commission reports to the High Commissioner. The report appears to definitely indicate the skeleton cannot be that of Amelia Earhart. Whew, good. We don't have to do anything about it. Good. And the whole thing just kind of was forgotten. It wasn't even classified. And they didn't even officially close the file. They just stopped doing anything. And it just disappears into this inevitable. It's kind of like the last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it just goes. And the whole incident only existed as a rumor that very few people believed until we tracked down the original British file in an obscure British archive 60 miles north of London in 1998. But then we had the measurements. And we gave those measurements to two modern forensic anthropologists, Dr. Ken Burns and Dr. Richard Jantz. And they plugged it into the databases that are available now for identifying gender and ethnicity. And what comes out of the computer is white female of Northern European descent who stood 5'7", 5'8". Whoa. So they write a paper and concludes the morphology of the recovered bones, insofar as we can tell by applying contemporary forensic methods to measurements taken at the time, appears consistent with a female of Earhart's height and ethnic origin. Well, nothing in Earhart is simple. So in 2015, an archaeologist in Australia and a grad student in England write a paper. It says the Nicomero bones identification controversy, first-hand examination versus evaluation by proxy. Amelia Earhart found or still missing. Their contention was, you can't say that. You don't have the bones. This guy had the bones. You can't say he's wrong. So Richard Jantz goes back and says, how much information can you get me about Amelia Earhart? We go to our forensic imaging guy and we start working. Let's find out how tall she is. And so we did, and we got her height through forensic imaging. That was kind of interesting. This photo, to do that, we needed to find a photograph of Amelia standing beside something that still exists. Well, we got a great picture of her standing beside the propeller of the Lockheed Vega. She flew across the Atlantic in 1932, which is now in the National Air and Space Museum. So I called the National Air and Space Museum. I said, we need to borrow your Vega for a while. And believe it or not, they let us in there before the museum opened. We took the exhibit apart and we recreated the photograph with measuring sticks and very carefully. Amelia was 5'7", not 5'8", like she said on her pilot's license. Arm bone lengths. We were able to establish the actual length of her bones, which match the measurements the doctor took. Brachial index is the ratio of the length of your lower arm to your upper arm, humerus versus radius. And hers was kind of unusual. She had unusually long lower arms. Not freaky, but unusual. And the castaway, exactly the same brachial index. Skeletal robustity. In order to determine her general build, we got clothing that's in the Purdue collection, her clothing, and had a woman who's a historical seamstress expert apply measurements and stuff. And so Jantz was able to get a feel for her build and her body mass index. Well, okay, so in 2018, Richard Jantz writes a paper, peer-reviewed paper published in the Journal of Forensic Anthropology, Amelia Earhart and the Nicomero bones, a 1941 analysis versus modern quantitative techniques. And he concluded, this analysis reveals that Earhart is more similar to the Nicomero bones than 99% of individuals in a large reference sample. Until definitive evidence is presented that the remains are not those of Amelia Earhart, the most convincing argument is that they are hers. Okay. All right. I'm going to run through the archaeological evidence pretty quickly because I think we're running out of time. We found where the bones were found. We excavated it. We had to clear it. It was a bitch. Clear that area, sorry. Very hard work, 120 degrees, machete work. But we found artifacts that speak of an American woman of the 1930s, a woman's compact, mirror, makeup, a jar that once contained freckle cream, a cream used to make freckles fade, 18% mercury. Ooh. Clams, bottles of hand lotion, on and on. Nothing with her name on it, but if you're a castaway, what do you have with your name on it? We didn't find her credit card. and there bottles. She had a system for boiling water and keeping the water, a zipper, exactly your right time period, a pocket knife, same kind of pocket knife that appears in an inventory of her airplane that was taken after the Hawaii accident. Do we have a piece of the plane? We found this piece of aluminum in 1991. My wife actually found it. It's obviously a piece of an airplane, but what airplane? And we've had it looked at by everybody, the National Transport Safe Board, ELCOA, and so forth. Right now, it's at the at Penn State University. They're using their neutron beam analysis with their nuclear reactor on it. It's kind of crazy. And we have, what we think it is the patch that was put on her airplane in Miami just before she started her second world flight. And we think we're going to be able to prove that. What happened to the plane? It ain't there anymore, folks. It's so rugged out there. Ballard searched for it for 2 weeks in 2019, couldn't find anything because it's such a dynamic environment. That shipwreck is just scraps now. And the only thing that's left is little pieces covered over with coral. Our conclusions are Earhart did what she said she was doing. She ran north and south on the 157 line. The aircraft made a relatively safe landing on the dry reef northwest of the island. She sent radio distress calls for 6 nights before the aircraft was washed into the ocean. An aerial search of the island by the US Navy on the 7th day saw but failed to recognize signs of Earhart's presence. And Noonan died of injuries. Earhart survived for a time as a castaway. Her remains were found in 1940, but misidentified. And you'll find a whole lot more at www.tiger.org. So that's 33 years in a presentation that went way too long. But
were any of those products that she was known to use?
No. She did endorse products, but they weren't the kind of products. Like she endorsed Horton's malted milk balls. Yeah.
What? Okay, she
Yeah. Now she did. We don't know that she used freckle cream, but she had freckles, and we know that she didn't like her freckles. She complained about, well, I didn't have a hat and it was sunny, so my freckles will be, you know. So there's that. To me, the smoking gun in this thing is still the Pan Am direction finder bearings. There's no other way to explain those. No other way. You can talk about all the artifacts and say, well, we don't know everything that happened on that site since 1937. And it's true. There could have been other explanations for that stuff. The piece of aluminum that we're now working on, we are getting very close to being able to say that this matches in every detail that patch that was put on her airplane. And this is very recent. This was like 2 weeks ago. We've discovered that a woman in Georgia has a whole collection of pictures taken in Miami that nobody else knew they had them. Her great uncle was there and took a bunch of pictures, and she just had them. So we went there and we scanned them at super high resolution, and our forensic imaging guy is now working with that. We need to be able to look at every rivet, the space between rivets, every wrinkle, everything. And if we can match that, that's how you identify an artifact. You take the unknown thing and match it to the known thing. And if they are alike, this is one of these. And that's what we may be able to do. But I won't kid you that everybody wants that airplane to be intact on the bottom of the ocean. Mostly Bob Ballard, you know, you're not going to get it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What? Did you hear our question?
Thank you.
Got here a question.
Oh yeah. Okay. God, this was 2017. A guy who was convinced he was captured by the Japanese is in the National Archives, and he's looking through naval intelligence files for naval intelligence for the preparation for the invasion of the Marshalls in 1944. And he finds this photograph of the dock at Jalowit Atoll, which was the Japanese headquarters in the Marshall Islands. And there are a bunch of people standing around on the dock, no soldiers, but there is a person who appears to be a white female sitting on the edge of the dock way out there with her back to the camera. And there's a guy standing over here and you can only see part of him. And he says, my God, that's Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
And I looked at the photo. I said, no, it's what the caption on the bottom says. It's the dock at Jalowit. That's what the Navy needed to have a picture of. What they're going to invade the Marshalls, and they need a picture of the dock at Jalowit. Well, no, this was a big mistake. This was escaped the cover up, and he sold the History Channel on the idea that that's what it was. And the History Channel does a 2-hour show about it, and I just shit. And 3 days after the show aired, 3.4 million viewers. A historian in Japan says, no, that picture, we've got it right here in our National Library. It was in a 1935 travel guide. That's where the Navy found it for the. That was a lot of fun. Yeah. Boy, have I been down that road. Okay, so we thought, well, okay, what happened to the bones? We can't find them. I've run 3 expeditions in Fiji. We've turned the place upside down. There's no sign of the bones. Remember, when they finished, they said, these are just the bones of some old guy. And they probably just got rid of them. But we've looked for them, can't find them. But we thought, but what if we could find bones on the island that hadn't been found and get DNA from those? And we've tried and tried, and we find artifacts and stuff, no bones. And we thought, well, how about this stuff that we found that she obviously touched? Can we get touch DNA from that? And in 2010, we did an excavation of that site where we're all wearing masks and gloves and special bags and stuff, and nothing. I mean, it doesn't survive. DNA likes cold and dark, and there's just not a lot of cold and dark on Niku. And yeah.
Carl and Cecilia from the internet want to know, were there any signs of Noonan?
Yeah, no sign of Noonan. There was part of a man's shoe that Gallagher found way back when, but one of the things that Betty, our 15-year-old girl in Florida, writes in her notebook is Amelia says something about what Betty writes down as uncle, and then she says, oh, ouch, and Betty writes, gosh darn. And I think uncle is really ankle. And because in other messages, she said Amelia had some injuries. I think she had a bad ankle. And I asked Betty about gosh darn. She said, well, I was 15 years old. That's not what Amelia said. I said, well, what did she say? Goddamn son of a bitch is what she said. Again, occult information. Most people didn't know that Amelia Earhart could swear like a sailor. And especially if she was upset. So, yeah. But we've struggled with DNA, but it ain't in the cards, unfortunately.
Well, you can say that we're actually out of time.
Well, yes. You've been very patient.
So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And next time we do this, we'll get the technology a little smoother, huh?
We're hoping. We're always hoping here. So thank you everybody for coming, and thank you everybody on Zoom. This has been great.
Anybody who'd like a book, just let me know and we'll work that out.
And we are accepting donations for the Arden Club in the basket over there.
And you can join Tiger on our website.
Oh, yes. Good.